Now that you found a seat, we're going to mess things up. This is a discussion session. This is, we're not going to talk at you, we're going to talk with you. We're roughly going to talk about what the hell is going on. What does it mean, particularly for kids and teachers in schools, and how do we deal with that? I'm Tom Vander from Getting Smart. We're a Seattle learning design firm. Is Caroline here? My colleagues that actually run the place are around somewhere. I am going to lead a conversation. Oh, there's Caroline. She runs Getting Smart. Let's see. I'm going to lead a conversation where Scott is sitting about new job pathways. So Tyler from Jobs for the Future, you have to come. We're gonna be back there talking about new job pathways, particularly high school pathways to getting and making new forms of jobs. I have some world-class colleagues to lead a couple other conversations. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your organization?
Good afternoon. My name is Garza, and I'm the president and CEO of Battelle for Kids. We're a national not-for-profit headquartered out of Columbus, Ohio. We've worked over the last 5 years with over 1,200 school districts and state agencies all around how do we transform schools to create learners and for the future. So we work in school communities where we take the conversation back to the community. How many of you are concerned about how disconnected our communities are with our schools? I can tell you we have found time and time again with all the school districts we work with, once you really meaningfully engage your community back in the work, it really can create some momentum around some important change that can occur in classrooms all throughout a school district. So we'll talk more about that in the group that I think I'm going to be facilitating here in just a moment.
So we'll have Karen up here, and so you can bring a chair or just wander over there. One of the assets that Karen's group has is it's called portraitofagraduate.org, and it's a roadmap for having community conversations about what's happening, what does it mean, how to prepare. It's also got a gallery of dozens of graduate profiles that communities have developed, and we believe it's a critical first step for any community that's trying to launch change. So community change conversations with Karen is over here, and Tim Taylor.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Taylor, and I am the co-founder and president of an organization called America Succeeds. We are a network of business-led organizations around the country that engage on education policy. So these are groups of business leaders who come together and focus exclusively on education policy in their state. So as the end users of the education system's product, these business leaders come to the table to talk about the types of students they're getting and how they can help and what they can do in the system. 2 years ago, we released a report called The Age of Agility. It is our version of the future of work. Any organization worth their salt, it seems, has released a future of work report.
And you can find it at ageofagility.org. It's an amazing set of resources.
Fantastic. And what the report found at the end, it did not offer any solutions, but the big aha at the end of that was, if students need to be agile to succeed in a competitive global economy where we have absolutely no idea of the types of skill sets that they're going to need or the jobs that they're going to fill, then the systems that prepare them need to be just as agile. So how do we create school systems that are not static and stuck and creating things that last, if they take 10 years to implement and then they're stuck there for another 10 years, whereas the world right now is changing? So how do we inject agility into public education so it is just as responsive to the needs of kids? And that's the conversation I want to have and lead with you today.
So if you want to have that conversation, we'll do it over here. So agile communities and school systems here, the how to connect with communities and have conversations about what kids should know and be able to do. This is sort of future of high school and particularly pathways to new careers. We're going to do that for about 25 minutes. Each group should grab a recorder, somebody that can report out. We'll get back together around 3:35, so you got about 25 minutes, and then we'll do a quick report out of those groups and have a quick whole group conversation. Go. Grab a seat or stand where you can see. We're going to do 5-minute report outs really quick. All right. Come up here, scrunch up here, grab a seat, turn around at least. Why don't we start with, we should start with the community conversations about, all right. So, hey, let me get the laggards over here. Tim, come on, join the group. All right, love you guys, get over here. All right, we're gonna do 5-minute report outs. We're gonna do 4-minute report outs. Give us the headlines from your conversation. Do you want to, Kieran?
She wants us to go on the stage.
Kick us. Do you want to kick us off?
She
Any
would
headlines?
She would like for us
David.
to go on the stage.
Come on up here.
We had a wonderful
David, tell us about how to connect with our communities. Go.
Oh, sure. Well, I wasn't expecting this. So we had a wonderful conversation in our group over here about community connections and how we can better engage the communities to support our vision of a graduate, K through 12. And we talked a little bit about leadership and how the leadership really needs to help develop a coherent strategy and engage a diverse group of members from the community, your elderly population, your families, your single people living in the community, and that your students are sometimes your greatest communicators of that message. And just speaking from my own experiences in a small town in Connecticut, I'm a K-5 principal. I think that's where we fall short. We don't have our kids as part of the conversation and leading and getting that message out to the community, and there's a disconnect there. We also talked about, one of the gentlemen in our group talked about the touch points that a student has outside of school and how the majority of those connections are being made, and a lot of that learning is happening outside of our schools. So making sure that vision of what a graduate looks like is clear beyond the schools too, because it truly does take a village, and that was something that I think really kind of stuck home for me. So that is a very brief summary of our community conversation. Yep. Thank you.
Karen, what was the coolest comment or insight that you had in the group?
Coolest, man. We had a wonderful group. I really liked the comment that you referred to about a thriving ecosystem, that education doesn't just occur in the schools, and how are you leveraging assets in the broader community. You can't really do that unless you've had a conversation with the community, right? How have you engaged them, and what are the hopes, aspirations, and dreams we have for the children in our own community, and then how we go about creating that together. And there's something really empowering for a broader community when you have that conversation, and so much that's possible that maybe had never been considered before. So I think we had a lot of conversation around how it is important to really engage all elements of your community in crafting that new vision.
That's great. Let me borrow this again. All right, if you weren't in that group, do you have a great example of community conversations that resulted in new outcomes, or do you have a burning question for them? If you weren't in that group. Yes, JFF. Tyler, give her your mic, will you?
But I think when talking about these concepts, sometimes it's helpful for me to be grounded in a example. So I'm curious in that conversation that you had, if there was an example of an organization or two that found some success or maybe tried some things that didn't work.
So as Tom mentioned earlier, part of our challenges in not-for-profit is making sure that we want to create a movement. We want to change the world, okay?
What's the goal that you have by 2021?
Well, we'd like to have 21% of all school systems that have crafted a portrait of a graduate and are really working hard to implement that.
So we got to get started.
So we got to get busy. I'm finding that there's a difference between victims and visionaries. And we're calling all visionaries to this work, okay? Because it takes a lot of hard work to completely turn a system on its head. But if you go to portraitofagraduate.org, we have a lot of examples of school districts that are involved in our national networks. And by the way, networks are very, very important to this work. So we have a national network of about 225 school districts that are going deeper on this work, changing their practices in classroom, changing the experiences for kids, changing their assessment practices, how they're telling their story, and there's some great examples on our website. And then we also have some state networks that we're working together and learning and accelerating our improvement together.
All right. Last example, El Paso kicked off their turnaround with a set of community conversations at every middle school that resulted in a beautiful profile of graduate. And then on the subject of networks, they used New Tech Network to kick off new school development, started 10 great high schools, and then built a component model to work with the other 90 schools. So great example of how a portrait of a graduate can kick off a community transformation and great use of networks.
One last thing I would say is please engage your students. We have found in every case where the students were fundamentally involved. We're also leading a NIC, a Networked Improvement Community out of Virginia, around student-led assessment. Is completely, it's amazing to see
So
kids.
Keith from Odyssey STEM, he's back there shaking his head. Student voice is super important in this community conversation. All right, Tim, what did you guys talk about?
All right. I didn't follow instructions. I kept our notes, and I'm not confident in my millennial skin enough yet, so I'm announcing that my notes are on my phone. That's why I'm looking at my phone here. So we kicked off, and we were talking about something that came out of our Age of Agility tour, which was the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, are now table stakes, right? Every kid needs to have those, and we've moved beyond that. The currency of the future for these kids are what we call the 4 C's: creativity, communications, collaboration, and critical thinking skills. You can substitute G for grit if you want in there. It's not important, but that there's more to it now than just coming out of schools with the 3 R's, right? And so we talked a little bit about that, and then we talked about system change, right? So how are we going to get here? What are employers doing? The theme of ours was, how do you weigh in on a system that's pretty resistant to change, to get to make change in a way that is rapid enough to respond to these kids who keep having birthdays, right? We've got to do this as fast as we possibly can. So we talked a little bit about that. There are great examples in Chicago where the community is a community-centered approach. We talked a little bit about employers weighing in, pushing on the system. We talked, one of the interesting things that came up was leadership management. It was somebody commented that this was a crisis of leadership management. How do we get leaders in schools, in school systems, and in employers to push on the systems themselves? I thought that was pretty interesting. We had somebody in our group who was from England. I think she may have stepped out. So England wants out of the EU, but they want into the agile environment of the world moving forward, right? So they're saying the same thing, that this is global currency. They are having the exact same conversations in England that she was able to share with us that we're having here. Those employers are desperate for the same types of things, that these kids can enter the workforce, compete in a global economy, and then contribute to their local communities, right? That's really what it all comes back to. So, and then let's see. We did have some really cool examples. We talked about Design 39 School, Cajon Valley, a school system that's well represented here that is doing some really innovative stuff. So there are pockets of excellence, but how do we get this at scale so that every kid can participate in the future?
Example or question?
One of the things that I noticed as I've been auditing schools, I have a teaching degree, and so I wanted to go from San Jose to Sacramento. Principals were sometimes the stumbling block to the creativity and the ability to get to where you want to get to. So while the elephant in the room sometimes is the principal, what are we going to do about that? Because the stakes are so high and the sensitivity is incredible.
Yeah. What's your answer?
Well, I would just say I have a bias on that. I think that's why superintendent leadership is very important to this.
Right.
I mean, we can go about trying to change one school at a time, and how long is it going to take us to scale this work? So we work with school systems and really talk with them about the systemness of this work, meaning you have to have all your principals on board. You have to measure what matters there. You have to, we do what's called BFK rounds, where you can look for your portrait for graduate in practice. So it starts to me at the highest level.
I totally agree. It's got to be baked into what they see and hear and feel from the system. The other thing I would add is school visits. School board is super important. School visits are a great way to help principals and teacher leaders see what's possible, to stretch their sense of what's possible, right? Because otherwise they're just trying to improve the system they inherited. But unless they can go visit Design 39 or Del Lago, like some of you did the other day, they don't see it. How do you help make a really big system more agile? What are you doing in Broward?
Oh, God. This is all difficult work to begin with, but when you think about we have 15,000 teachers, 270,000 students, communities, where's, the communities that we're dealing with, we're vast. So we have an east side of town, we have a west side of town. The problems on one side are completely different than the problems on the other side. I think you take small steps, you try to scale up, you try to find out what's working, you try to plant the seeds and then replicate it in other places. What we're doing right now is trying to develop what we're calling Lighthouse Schools. We're trying to get them to identify the right people to work on big problems and get solutions, and then to act as demonstration sites, so they're scaling up from within, and we utilize them to scale from outside as well.
Thank you. Tyler, what did we learn about pathways or individual journeys towards great careers?
We learned a lot of different things. Many different examples were shared, most of which Tom shared have been featured on gettingsmart.com. So that was really clear, and everyone shared some pretty great specific examples of schools and people doing it in really effective ways. But we started the conversation focusing on early college and connecting high schools with potential opportunities to connect students with post-secondary in a better way. We also talked about real-world intersections, work-based learning, applied learning. What was clear is that the highway is littered with many different programs doing it in different ways, in effective ways, and really specific regionally based ways, which was great to see. We focus on guidance and mentorship in the realm of taking and adopting new technologies. One thing was clear was that you can't substitute the interactions of an adult or somebody who cares or really gives a damn with a student with a certain piece of technology. So that was really clear. I'm actually going to kick it to Angelo because we also talked a lot about design thinking.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm an ed tech entrepreneur. We're building a new product called Solvably, focused around design thinking. So preparing students, similar to entrepreneurship, for the workforce and getting design thinking as part of an instinctual process. We say design thinking meets Slack meets escape rooms. So, really trying to focus it. And if we're looking for teachers, principals, anyone who would like to collaborate with us, it's solvably.com. And, I think that's really the future of the workforce and how we're going to help transform competitiveness in the workforse.
Yeah. Yeah, go.
I was just going to, go ahead. I was going to wrap.
Well, dude,
with a W.
So I just want to underscore design thinking, why it's a big deal. Kids are going to leave into a world that's full of novelty and complexity, and they go to school that values routine and compliance. Every kid has to have access to some extended challenges, big, complicated, integrated, community-connected projects that end up in public products. At least some of those have to be open-ended, inquiry-based. They have to apply design thinking so that when they step into complexity, they are humble about the complexity, but confident that they know what to do next, that they know how to start. So some schools call that computational thinking, some call it inquiry-based learning, some call it studio model, some call it design thinking, but it's a structured problem-solving approach for stepping into big problems that don't have simple answers. And every high school kid deserves a big dose of those. So that was sentiment there. Closing thoughts on this big, complicated project?
Tom, you closed the group in talking about AI and AI's role in closing the guidance gap. And continuous improvement on that front. So I just want to end it with there.
Thank you. That's a good kick. We have another session on AI at 4 o'clock. We're going to talk about the implications of AI. It's the most important thing happening in the world right now. Tell us what you're thinking about.
Oh,
Giselle.
wow. We have to blow it all up and, start over again. Really, there is no... I remember saying that at a Grantmakers for Education meeting 12 years ago.
And that's before we really knew that AI was going to be a big.
Well, that was AI wasn't even, in the consciousness. I mean, we don't have a system. It cannot be fixed.
Right.
We really, when I say blow it up, I mean, and I think that all the people, there are so many people now that are proving that they can do this.
Right.
We need to get them together, and we have 3.5 million teachers. They can't be happy about the job they're doing.
Yeah.
They have another way of doing that job. There's evidence of that. But people should be putting pressure on the governance part of this, on the fact that we're still using the same system we did in 100, more, right? The curriculum was created in the 19th century.
Yeah. But you're pretty convicted that AI is a big deal.
There's no question about it.
Yeah.
I mean, AI, it's just a question of how well we'll be able to manage it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it'll manage us.
Yeah. All right. On that cheery note, the point here is you have to be having a conversation about artificial intelligence and more broadly about exponential technology, big data, the enabling technologies like robotics. You have to be having that conversation with your kids. You have to admit that you don't understand it, and you have to enter into a community conversation that begins to let the impacts seep into your system. Christina, my colleague on AI for K12, she's co-chair of an effort. It's a national network of computer science profs that are trying to define what kids should know about AI. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, we're also working with K12 teachers, because we know we don't know it all as university profs, so really trying to make sure we have the voice of K12 teachers, and we're working on creating guidelines from all the way from kindergarten all the way to high school, and looking at what would those progressions look like, and actually creating a curated resource directory so that there's actually tools for students to play around with AI and actually have these in-depth conversations
and to
about
learn more, they go to
AI4K12.org, number 4.
Karen, where people go to find more, where do they go?
You can go to bfk.org, which stands for battelleforkids.org,
That's
or
new, isn't it?
no, that's us.
I know, but I always go to Battelle for Kids.
Battelle for
BFK.
Kids. BFK will take you there too.
Cool.
Okay.
And
Or
portraitofagraduate.org.
portraitofagraduate.org. Thank y'all for being here. We appreciate your
Tim,
interest
where
in the
can
work
they go
you're
to find
doing.
more?
Go to ageofagility.org.
Awesome. You can also, as Tyler said, go to gettingsmart.com. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.